Such a great feeling when you're swimming in an abundance of berries and fruits. And of course, I'm sure you have lots of ideas. Perhaps you do crumbles, pies, you throw them into smoothies. Wanted to share with you one of the things that I've started doing this year, in particular with Saskatoons. Now, this recipe will work for any kind of berry, so whatever you have extra on hand, this will absolutely work. And it's a recipe that you do one time, but you're going to get two different results out of it. We're talking about Saskatoon berry syrup and Saskatoon berry jam. All right, so let's get started. If you've been out harvesting your own wild berries, that's wonderful, that's awesome. Or maybe it's not that time of year and you've got blueberries that you buy from the store, or whatever it is. Any kind of fruit or berry will work in this case. We've been out with the family, we've been picking the wild Saskatoons, and what I love about wild harvesting berries in particular is such a great place to start. Get yourself out there, connected with nature, and harvesting your own food. They're really easy to identify, they're delicious, and of course they're easy to pick. So, I've been out with my family a number of times this year and probably collected, at least 10, 12 pounds, and the season is not even over. We're just getting started. So you'll end up oftentimes, your freezer's full, you already had your fill of fresh berries. This is another way that you can preserve your harvest and make it last throughout the year. And again, it's a very simple recipe. So you take your berries, you're going to put those into a pot, and I've gotten some started here already. Just want to speed up the process and show you how it's done. So you got your berries, you're going to put it into a pot, and then you're going to add not quite equal parts water, but let's say you've got I don't know, I probably had about 4 or 5 pounds here of berries. I put in a couple of cups of water. What that's going to do, as I turn up the heat, the water will come to a boil, and I'll just help reduce down and pull out the flavor and break down the fiber of those berries. So essentially we're almost going to have like a berry stew that's going on here. One of the things about Saskatoons in particular, and all fruit, contains pectin, and that's the fiber, and that's kind of, what's often added to jam to give it that kind of gelatinousness. Like, think of it as almost like a fruit gelatin. This pectin makes things kind of stick and hold together. So we bring that to a boil. Again, that breaks down that fiber, pulls out the juices, and we're almost have created, like a Saskatoon stew, essentially. So bring that to a boil, let it simmer. And I've let it cool, so we're now at the stage where I can add that to a blender, and we're going to blend that. So, soupy, wet Saskatoon, ready to go into the blender. Here's some here, ready, in the blender, and we're going to turn that on and blend well. Okay, after giving it a nice good blend, that's going to definitely break up all the skins, break down that fiber, and even kind of break some of those seeds up as well. You just pour that into a regular fine mesh strainer. And I did about half that first batch, so I'm going to do the second half here. Get it all blended up. Careful of the juices. Of course, you probably notice even when you're picking them, it does stain the finger. But that's one of the benefits, the properties. These, deeply pigmented foods, even things like turmeric, right? They can definitely deeply stain. That nutrients is represented by the color, or the color represents the nutrients. And the fact that it's able to do that, it's able to get deep into the body, deep into the tissues, and that nutrition is there. So. All right, here's the rest of my batch. Blend up the rest here. All right, we'll let that sit as I begin to kind of let this pass through the strainer. And what we're going to get on the other side is a bit of a thicker sauce that's going to drip through, and that we're going to turn into our syrup, and everything that's left over in the strainer is going to be that fiber, some of the seeds that didn't break down, and that'll be our jam. And I'll show you how that looks in just a moment. So you just give it a helping hand through the strainer. All right, that's coming through nicely. Here's where we needed that extra bit of water. I mean, obviously you can just make a jam by blending these up from the cooked berries, and you know that could be a jam right there. The idea of straining it is we're going to get a nice smooth consistency coming out the other side. That will be our syrup, and then basically this leftover pulp that's still good, lots of good fiber and flavor in there, that's going to be our jam. I actually came upon this recipe by accident, wanting to make a syrup, and as I had strained everything out, I was like, well, this is still really good. So that's what I turned into a jam, and as much as I love the syrup, I almost like the jam even more. But don't get me wrong, they're both good. All right, pour the rest in there. So depending on the consistency of how much water you added, again, if you didn't add any, it would be extremely thick, and it would be very hard to separate out, you know, any liquid. You'd have a little bit for sure, but the more water you add, the more watery it's going to be, the more that's going to strain through, and you'll be left with that kind of thick, really pectin-y mass in the strainer. All right. No right or wrong in this recipe. It's just exploring and just using this basic method. Okay, I'm going to grab a spatula, make sure I get all of it out of the blender. And you can even just let it sit. It'll work its way through. You can even get underneath the strainer and help some of that come out as well. So this will have a nice fine consistency, everything that's through the strainer, and then again more kind of a thick pulp left in the strainer. And you don't need to strain it all either. We can absolutely just leave what's in there. You can kind of cut it half and half. Half will be jam, half will be syrup. The main thing is, obviously, the syrup we want it really kind of smooth without any of that fiber. So at any point you can say, great, got enough of my syrup, got enough of my jam, and I'm going to do that right now. So I've still got a good couple cups here in the strainer, so I'm just going to pour that back into the pot. And that will be my jam. And then what's left in my big measuring cup there, it's about 3 cups there we got. That will then turn into the syrup. So I'll show you how that is done. Okay, so for this next step, we've got the jam. That again was all our portion that was inside the strainer, still with all the fiber, all the seeds. Tastes delicious. This step, you know, is completely optional. You can just enjoy the jam as is. But you might want to sweeten it just a touch. Now, that's your choice. You can either use a sun-dried cane juice or a whole sugar like sucanat, coconut palm sugar. It can be honey, it can be maple syrup, whatever it is. I think for the syrup, when I sweeten that, I'm going to use honey, or I could use maple syrup. I'll show you that in a second. But this one, for the jam, I'm going to use just a whole cane sugar. So, but your choice. You can leave it as is, which is, it's nice and mild, but just for a little extra sweetness, as jam tends to be, we can put in a bit of sugar of your choice. And this is where I rewarm it, and by heating it just helps the sugar kind of dissolve into the jam. Again, I probably got maybe 3-4 cups of Saskatoon berry jam, and I put in about a cup of sugar. Now that's up to you, of course. You know, you can start with quarter, half, a cup, you know, just taste it, right? That's the idea. And as we heat it, that will just help that sugar dissolve in, and then you'll have a nice jam once it's cooled down. All right, jam is in the jars. That pot is now ready and available for us to put in the strained portion of our Saskatoons. Now this is how we're going to make the syrup. Now it's quite still, I wouldn't say it's thick, but it's thicker than your, you know, consistency of a syrup. Now, depending on what type of sweetener you're going to add, again, you can add a cane sugar, coconut sugar, anything granulated. I did this almost exact same method with rhubarb. So you harvest the rhubarb, you chop it up, you basically boil it, and then you put it in a strainer, and all that juice comes right through. And I chose to use, actually added rose to it as well, and I chose to use a lighter, not a white sugar, but something that was a little bit more refined, just to really kind of allow the more delicate flavors of rose and the rhubarb to come through versus a darker sugar. Now with Saskatoons, we've already got kind of a dark flavor, so adding in, you know, a whole cane sugar with more of that molasses notes or tones, or even the maple syrup, totally fine. You can do it with honey, so your choice. If you're adding the maple syrup, that will help kind of thin the syrup as well. You can add a little bit of extra water if you need. Honey will do that. Obviously, a cane sugar won't thin it out either. So add your choice of sweetener, maple, honey, or cane. In this case, I'm going to go for honey. So again, you get to choose how much you want to put in there, how sweet you like it. And for my, 3 cups, at least 1. Most syrups obviously are quite sweet. There's a lot of sweetener in them, but when you're making it at home, you get to choose and have a taste. You'll really notice, without sweetener, add some in, stir it up, taste it again. It really does emphasize and enhance the flavor. Plus, it's a syrup. That's what it's all about, is a nice sweet syrup for ice cream, for pancakes, whatever it is. And we're just adding in those wonderful nutrients of the berries, the antioxidants, the vitamins, the minerals, everything that they offer. Wonderful taste of the wild. And of course, honey, this is a wildflower honey, so that kind of pairs with the theme. Or we can have a nice northern sugar like a maple syrup and enhance it that way. So one thing that we want to do, we do actually want to heat this as well. Again, it'll help integrate the sugars into the syrup, and specifically for the honey as well. Although I hate to do it, I love honey that's unpasteurized, that's raw, that hasn't been heated. But in the case of our syrup, we do actually want to heat it, essentially do our own version of pasteurizing, because if not, then this will ferment in the bottle. Which, hey, I'm all about fermentation. I love fermenting honey, but what it'll do is, you could have potential of explosion as it builds up. That carbon dioxide could turn slightly alcoholic. So when we heat it, we're basically gonna, we're gonna lose those enzymes and the living bacteria that might be in there, but it'll keep it more shelf stable, essentially, is what we're doing here. So give that a nice warm. Essentially, it doesn't need to be to a boil, but just about almost. And then kind of turn it down, a low simmer, and your syrup will be ready. So again, if you want to adjust for the consistency, you can at this stage add a little bit of water, depending on how much you started with originally. I mean, the jam, it's nice and thick, it's amazing. The syrup, you want a consistency that'll pour out. You don't want anything too watery or too runny, but you do want something that, in a nice kind of long fluted bottle that will pour out onto a pancake or pour onto ice cream or yogurt or however you're having it. So just adjust with a little bit of water accordingly. And again, taste for sweetness. So I'll let this come to a simmer. I've got some nice bottles that I'll put it into. But there we go. We got the jam, we got the syrup from our wild harvested Saskatoons. If you have some that you are looking for more ideas to what to do with, this is a great way. But of course, absolutely any kind of fruit, be it Nankings, be it blueberries, cherries, strawberries, rhubarb. This is a fun way to use your summer harvest. Enjoy.